Hi, I'm Sorrel. And my parents kicked me out during a snowstorm. Not just kicked out, erased. They opened the door without a coat, without a word, and shut it behind me like I'd never been their daughter. My sister watched from the window, sipping wine and smiling. That night, I made 3 calls. By morning, I had 17 missed ones. But the worst part? It wasn't the cold. It was realizing they'd been planning my absence for years, slowly rewriting me out of the family, out of the legacy, out of their story. Why? And what exactly did I do with the files they didn't know I had? I never liked that room. The air was always a little too still, like it had been trained to hold its breath for years. Dust didn't dare settle there, not with Vespara's standards. And the portraits, so many perfect smiles frozen in time, watched you like they remembered things you'd rather forget. It was late autumn in Aspen, and the cold had started slipping in through the window frames of the estate, no matter how tightly they were sealed. I'd returned, dutifully, as always, for the family's annual legacy dinner. The invitation, as usual, arrived not from a person, but as a formal email signed by the family foundation. A calendar event, not a gesture. Vespera was in the center hall, arranging pieces for the exhibit she curated every year. Photos, trophies, press clippings, carefully chosen to remind guests of the artisan pedigree. She didn't look up when I walked in. "Make yourself useful," she said, gesturing toward a stack of silver frames. "Sort the ones from the 90s. We're leaning into continuity this year." I knew better than to ask questions. I started scanning each frame, silently placing them in order. That's when I saw it, or didn't see it. The photograph from my 10th birthday, the one Grandpa took of me standing between Cortland and Vespera, grinning with frosting on my chin. It was missing. In its place was Varel's equestrian photo, the one where she's holding the medal from her junior championship, all posture and prestige. I picked it up. "What happened to my birthday photo?" Vespera barely turned. "That one didn't print well. The lighting was off. Besides, this tells a stronger story." "Of course it does." I nodded, gently setting the frame back down. She didn't notice my fingers shaking. I didn't let them. Later in the hallway, I ran into Varel. She was wearing silk, carrying herself like Aspen's unofficial royalty. Her eyes met mine and she smiled like someone who'd already read the ending of a book I hadn't finished writing. "If you were memorable," she said, brushing past me, "they'd remember you." I let that hang in the air, the slap of it softer than her stilettos on the marble floor. "Well," I said, turning to face her back, "I guess I'll just have to become unforgettable." She didn't turn around. 2 weeks later, the estate was decked out for her engagement gala. The chandeliers were dimmed just right, and the champagne walls sparkled like someone had polished every bottle by hand. I wore a navy dress, nothing flashy, just tailored enough to remind them I belonged. Except I didn't. I walked past the welcome board. A quick scan of the seating chart showed my name at the bottom, labeled under Hospitality Coordination. My table, near the back, next to the hallway that led to the restrooms, the kind of spot where guests who complain too loudly are quietly placed. A young waiter approached me as I stood there frozen. "You're in the hospitality circle, right?" he asked, polite but firm. Before I could answer, Varel passed by, clutching a crystal flute, her fiancé a few steps behind. She didn't stop walking. "Well," she murmured, "someone's got to make the guests feel welcome." I followed the hallway alone. Instead of sitting, I left an envelope on her seat at the head table, sealed, elegant, blank inside. Let her guess what I didn't say. As I stepped outside, the chill greeted me like an old friend. Snow had started falling, just lightly enough to sparkle under the estate's decorative lights. I looked back at the house. Through one of the tall windows, I could see them toasting. Vespera in velvet, Varel radiant in front of the camera. Everyone looked warm, glowing, held in the frame they'd so carefully crafted. And me? I was already fading out of focus. I hadn't realized yet that this wasn't the worst. The storm hadn't started. I always thought I walked away from them, but looking back now, I realized they'd closed the door long before I ever reached the handle. The morning after the gala, I stood inside the front lobby of Aspen General Hospital, holding a manila folder with insurance paperwork I didn't want to think about. The woman behind the glass at the records office barely looked up as I handed her the request slip. She tapped at her keyboard like the screen owed her money, then said, "It'll be 15 minutes." I nodded, moved to the bench by the window, and sat in silence while the heater clicked and hummed beside me. Outside, frost trimmed the sidewalks like lace. People bustled in and out, but my mind was buried beneath something colder than snow. Memory. The accident happened when I was 19. I'd been driving home from college during winter break, just a few miles out, when a deer darted across Highway 82. The car spun off-road, and the next thing I remembered was waking up to Vespera's soft voice saying, "We never left your side." Cortland added, "We slept in chairs those 2 nights." It was the only time I believed them without question. Back then, I needed to. When my name was called, I stood and followed a younger admin into the back hallway. She handed me a printout of my full medical file, procedures, medications, discharge notes, all normal. I hesitated. Then, pretending nonchalance, I asked, "Can you pull the visitor log for my stay? I need to confirm who signed in for billing verification." She gave me that half-curious, half-weary look that said, "We don't usually do this." But she disappeared into another room and returned with a clipboard. One sheet, stapled at the corner. It was blank. No Cortland, no Vespera, no Virel. Just dates, times, and silence. "I'm sorry," she said, handing it over. "Nobody was logged under your name during those dates." I held the paper carefully. It felt thinner than it should have. "That makes sense," I said quietly. "Some ghosts walk in, leave nothing behind, and still haunt you." On the way home, I didn't cry. Not then. I drove slowly, my hands steady on the wheel, and told myself this wasn't the worst discovery of the week. It was just the one that settled in deepest. Back at my apartment, I kicked off my boots, turned on the kettle, and dropped the file on the counter. I wasn't sure what I expected. An apology scribbled in the margins, a footnote, something that said, "We tried." Instead, I made tea. Later that afternoon, I found the Legacy Foundation's quarterly newsletter tucked in my mail slot, the kind printed on recycled paper with embossed gold lettering, always a bit too proud of itself. Inside was a full-page family tree graphic. It listed Vespera and Cortland at the top, like monarchy. Virel was centered below, complete with birth date and accolades in parentheses. Then there was Sorrel Veals. My name, misspelled. My birth date was wrong by 4 months, and next to it, relocated, currently unlisted in Family Foundation Network. I stared at the page as if staring hard enough could fix the spelling, the erasure, the quiet execution of my name from the narrative. I took a photo of it and sent it to Virel with one line. "Do you think they'll fix this in the next edition?" Her reply came fast. "It's probably a clerical error. Don't be dramatic." I looked at the screen a moment, then typed back. "I wasn't included. You don't misspell people you remember." She didn't respond again. I poured another cup of tea, no sugar this time. That night, while reorganizing some old paperwork, I opened one of the moving crates I never fully unpacked. At the bottom was a folder marked Events, RSVP Records. I had no idea why I'd kept it. Maybe habit. Maybe hope. Inside was a printed guest list from the Foundation's gala 2 years ago, the same one Vespera insisted I was too busy to attend. There it was, Sorrel Velis, crossed out in red pen. A thin, clean line, like someone erasing a margin mistake. They didn't just forget me. They planned to. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch with my laptop open, the glow of the screen casting long shadows against the bookshelves. The house was quiet. Too quiet, like even the walls were tired of pretending. I had meant to scan old receipts for tax season. Instead, I stumbled onto a forgotten folder. Email Export 2021. It was from my university email, backed up during a system change. I hadn't opened it since. Curious, maybe even foolish, I clicked through. It was all there. Random updates, newsletters, alumni spam, And then, near the bottom, a thread between Cortland and Varel. The subject line, foundation structure, next quarter. The conversation was 2 years old, but the sting hit fresh. Varel had written, "If she keeps asking questions, we may need to realign who appears in the board's photo sets. Optics matter." Cortland's reply was short, brutal. "Sorrel is like excess luggage. Pretty, but heavy and inconvenient." Below that, Varel again. "Then let's drop her off at the next stop." I didn't move. I didn't blink. It was too calculated, too cold. Not a moment of anger between them. Just strategy. Like my name was a file to be deleted quietly. I closed the laptop lid and sat in stillness. I wasn't surprised. Only by how casually they could write me out like a bad check. I remembered a brunch Vespera had hosted the following week, calling it a healing circle for the family. It was her version of damage control, whispered into her guest list like a PR statement disguised as an invitation. There had been homemade citrus tea in glass pitchers. She insisted I drink before we spoke. "You need to come to the table with peace," she said, pushing the cup toward me. I remember the flavor, sweet at first, then oddly sharp, like bitterness hidden in honey. I'd felt dizzy during that brunch. My hands didn't quite obey me. The words I wanted to say tangled in my mouth. My memory of that conversation was foggy, even then, and now, thinking back, it felt altered. Later that night, Vespera texted, "You see how peaceful everything was once you stopped fighting?" The phrase had felt off at the time. Now it sounded like a prescription she had written herself. That night, I pulled up old text threads from that week. I read messages I supposedly sent to friends, short, oddly worded, robotic in tone. One message ended with, "All is well in the House of Mirrors." I would never say that. I stared at the screen for a long time, nausea crawling in. Gaslighting isn't about lies, it's about making you doubt your right to reality. I didn't confront them, not yet. Instead, I printed the email thread and walked into the kitchen. I hovered over the trash bin, paper in hand. Then, after a pause, I folded it slowly and slid it into a folder labeled Truth. Fireproof, password protected, hidden in plain sight. I didn't keep it because I needed proof. I kept it because they'll need reminding. 5 days had passed since I printed out the email calling me excess luggage. 5 days since I stared at the tea Vespera once handed me and realized it might have been more than chamomile and citrus. I hadn't planned on going back to the estate so soon, but some lies don't sit still. They itch under your skin until you have no choice but to dig them out. I told Vespera I needed to retrieve some financial files for a tax audit. She didn't ask for details, just waved a hand and told the staff to let her poke around but not rearrange anything. Typical. She still talked about me like I was allergic to order. Mid-morning, I stepped into the basement archive. The air was cold, not like winter cold, but the kind you get from stone and secrets. The lights buzzed above me, and the whole place smelled like varnished wood and old paper, a scent I'd long associated with curated history. The ledgers were stacked in rows, labeled by year, foundation, and project. On the third shelf, wedged behind a dusty binder marked DV Holdings, I saw a leather envelope, different from the rest. No label, just a faint watermark from age and pressure. I opened it slowly. Inside were handwritten pages in my grandfather's looping cursive. At first, I thought it was a journal entry. Then I saw the notary seal, my name. The will had my name. He'd left me controlling shares in the foundation. Explicitly. Unequivocally. The date? 6 months before he died. I sank into the nearest chair. My breath steadied, then stuttered. I flipped through the pages twice to make sure it wasn't wishful thinking. It wasn't. Across the room, in a drawer marked Legal Final, I found the version everyone had seen. Digitized. Modern. Clean. My name wasn't on it. I wasn't just forgotten. I was rewritten out. A memory surfaced then, one I hadn't thought about in years. I was 16, standing with Grandpa in his greenhouse. He loved that space, called it the only place where beauty didn't need permission to grow. We were talking about family roles. I'd asked why Vespara always decided everything. He'd smiled, pressed a small folder into my hands, and said, "Power doesn't corrupt, Sorrel. It just reveals who's been rehearsing longest." I never saw that folder again. Vespara had taken it for safekeeping. Now, as I unfolded the final page of the old will, another piece fluttered out. A note on thick paper, the ink slightly faded. "If they cut you out, it means they fear you'll ask the right questions. To Sorrel, who sees what others won't. G." I pressed the paper to my chest, just for a second. Not for comfort, for confirmation. I scanned everything, every page, every line, time-stamped and uploaded to a drive with double encryption. Then I slipped the originals into a slim envelope, tucked it into my bag, and turned off the lights. As I walked up the stairs, the door at the top creaked open. Vespara stood in the hallway, backlit by the chandelier's soft glow, her arms crossed, one brow raised. "You still like to wander down rabbit holes, don't you?" I didn't stop walking, just stepped past her, calm and deliberate. And yet somehow, I always find the foxes hiding inside. She didn't ask what I found. That silence told me she already knew. The music started before the lights dimmed, a low, elegant blend of strings and piano, the kind of background hum curated not for enjoyment, but to imply wealth. I stood just outside the main ballroom, watching staff move like clockwork, wine glasses aligned, napkins pressed, place cards hand calligraphed. This was Varel's engagement gala, her stage, her kingdom for the night. Guests arrived in waves. Aspen elites, distant cousins flown in from the coasts, business partners who pretended to be friends. Everyone sparkled, everything was choreographed, and I, once again, was not in the script. A server handed me a glass of sparkling cider. I took it out of politeness, then set it down without sipping. I didn't need bubbles tonight. I needed clarity. When the slideshow began, I stood off to the side near a marble column. It opened with childhood photos of Virel, her first ribbon, her high school debate medal, that horseback shot I'd seen replace my birthday photo weeks ago. Each image brighter, more polished than the last, as if she'd never once stumbled. Then came the foundation footage, project launches, press clippings, women in legacy leadership features. Faces I recognized, but no sign of mine. Not one picture, not a footnote, nothing. The omission was too clean to be accidental. A woman in a blue satin dress, clearly new to the artisan orbit, leaned toward me. "You're the family assistant, right? You handled the press kits?" I didn't answer. I looked ahead and smiled like I hadn't just been mistaken for staff at my sister's party. On stage, Varel caught my eye. Mid-sentence, mid-pose, she held my gaze with the confidence of someone who'd already won. Then, casually, she dropped it. "Everything our family has built," she said, pausing for applause, "is thanks to those who carried it and those who never got in the way." There was laughter, genuine, effortless, and in that moment, I felt something more final than grief. I felt release. I left the ballroom before dessert. My heels echoed down the back corridor leading to the office wing. I knew where they stored the donor packets, the curated press releases sent out after every major event. The cabinet wasn't locked. Of course it wasn't. They never thought I'd come looking. Inside, stacked neatly in a manila folder, were 10 copies of the latest campaign story. Headline: How Virel Artisan's Vision is Reshaping Economic Inclusion. Pull quotes, glossy photo. A full-page feature describing her grant-winning proposal that had captured the attention of the state's Innovation Fund. I wrote that proposal 3 years ago. I pulled up the original on my phone, archived in an old Dropbox folder with timestamps, edits, and my name clearly on the author page. But here, in these packets, my name was nowhere. Every line I'd fought to phrase, every data point I'd sourced, now draped over her like a designer coat she'd always owned. I sat down slowly. No panic, just wait. I used to think silence was dignity, I whispered to no one. But silence was how they stole with my signature. I gathered the packets and placed them back. No need to make noise tonight. Not yet. Walking back through the hallway, I paused at a side window that overlooked the ballroom. Varel stood beneath the chandelier, golden in every sense of the word, raising her glass to toast. The crowd lifted theirs in return, and then, for just a second, she looked up. Our eyes locked. She tilted her head slightly, lips curling into that familiar half-smile. She mouthed two words, deliberate and smug. "You lost." I didn't flinch. I mouthed back, slow and sure. "Not yet." In that moment, I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I was the silence they feared might finally speak. The wind howled like it had something to prove. Thick sheets of snow lashed against the stone columns of the artisan estate, curling into corners and clinging to window panes like ghosts begging to be let in. I stood in the foyer, coatless, my voice steady, but the fury beneath it boiling. Vespara and Cortland stood across from me, still dressed in their polished civility, her in wool and pearls, him in a cardigan that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I found the will," I said. "Grandfather named me. He didn't forget me. You did that." Vespara crossed her arms, her mouth twitching like she might smile, or might snarl. It was always hard to tell with her. "You always read too much into things," she said lightly. "It was never about forgetting you. You just never fit the part. That's not cruelty, Sorrel. That's design." Cortland's voice followed, deep and dry. "You were always difficult to place. The foundation needs cohesion, not confusion." I laughed. It came out sharper than I expected. "You erased me for optics." Vespara didn't flinch. "You were never part of the plan. You just kept walking into rooms you didn't belong in." I stepped forward. "I belong in every room you kept locked." She opened her mouth, but Cortland raised his hand, signaling her to stop. Then, with chilling calm, he walked toward me, reached into the drawer near the entryway, and retrieved my phone and car keys. "Independence," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You've been begging for it your whole life. Go live it." He turned, opened the front door, and let the storm speak for them. The cold hit like a slap. Wind and snow swept into the house, rushing past my face and sending my hair flying behind me. Vespara stepped back to avoid the mess. I stood still. "No coat?" I asked. My voice barely rose above the howl. "You always said you hated being coddled," she said. "Consider this a favor." And then, with one hand, sharp, final, Cortland pushed me past the threshold. The door slammed shut behind me. Snow soaked into my socks instantly. My hands, bare and red, clutched my bag to my chest. The lights from the ballroom flickered through the frosted windows behind me, warm and distant. I forced my legs forward, one at a time, down the icy stone steps that led to the driveway. Each step felt heavier than the last. My breath clouded in front of me, curling and vanishing too fast to matter. Halfway down, I heard the soft tap of glass above. I looked up. There she was, Virel, second-story window, satin robe, wine glass in hand, watching. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She just smiled. Not with joy, not with malice, but with confirmation. She had won. She had always been playing a game I was too late to name. I turned away before she blinked. She didn't laugh. She didn't cry. She just watched. And I think that hurt worse than the wind. I stumbled toward the gate, vision blurring, toes numb. The storm swallowed sound, swallowed time, each breath a burning ache. My body slowed, and somewhere just past the hedgerow, my legs folded under me. Snow welcomed me like an old betrayal, familiar, cruel, silent. I closed my eyes, just for a moment. Then headlights, gravel crunching, a car door slammed. "Hey! Hey! Stay with me! Can you hear me?" Arms wrapped around my shoulders. A coat covered my back. A voice, steady and urgent, buzzed close to my ear. "You're not dying tonight, sweetheart. Not on my watch." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I woke up warm, not in a mansion, but in something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. I didn't wake up to sirens or fluorescent lights. I woke up to the faint scent of cinnamon and old wood, and the creak of a house that had settled into itself long ago. A patchwork quilt covered me, heavier than expected, stitched with colors that didn't match but somehow belonged together. The last thing I remembered was the cold swallowing me whole, and then nothing. Now, I was somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere safe. A soft knock at the door broke the stillness. It opened just enough for a woman to peer in, gray hair loosely tied, flannel shirt buttoned all the way up. "You're awake," she said gently. "Don't try to sit up too fast." I blinked at her, trying to place the face. Not hospital staff, not a stranger either. My mind was foggy, but something in her eyes tugged at something buried. She stepped in and handed me a mug, steam rising from it like a promise. Tea, just chamomile and a little honey. Nothing laced, I swear. That made me smile, even if weakly. "Where?" My throat rasped more than spoke. "You're in my home, about 10 minutes outside Woody Creek," she said. "I found you half buried near the main road. God knows how long you'd been walking." I nodded slowly, taking a sip. It burned, but in a good way. It reminded me I was still here. "I'm Audra Penrose." The name didn't hit me right away, but her voice did. Low, kind, unpolished by years of fake charity galas. Then her eyes caught the light just right, and suddenly it clicked. Blue scarf, winter bonfire, lullaby about stars I hadn't heard in decades. "You used to sing to me," I said. She smiled. "Your mother hated that, said lullabies made children sentimental." "You were my godmother?" I asked, though it wasn't quite a question. "Not on paper," she said, sitting beside the bed. "But yes, I used to hold you when you cried." Vespara and I were close once, until I started asking questions about how your grandfather's trusts were being handled. That warmth in her voice had an edge now. She pushed me out, quietly, of course, like she does with everything inconvenient. I didn't respond right away. My fingers tightened around the mug. "I thought I was alone because I was wrong," I murmured. "But maybe I was alone because I was dangerous to liars." Audra nodded slowly, as if she'd waited years to hear me say that. Later that morning, after I'd changed into the clothes she laid out, sweats, a flannel shirt that still smelled faintly of cedar, she led me into her study. Old books lined every wall. On her desk sat an ancient desktop computer humming quietly, and beside it, a locked drawer. She opened it, pulled out a small flash drive, and placed it in my hand. "I never had a daughter," she said. "But if I had, I would have told her to keep a paper trail." "What is it?" "Tax records, transfers, audio clips, meeting notes from my time consulting with Cortland. They must have thought I deleted everything after they dropped me." She paused. I didn't. I plugged the drive into her computer. Folders opened one by one, timestamps, signatures, names. In one audio file, I heard Cortland's voice, calm and clear. "If Sorrel stays involved, we're going to have PR problems. Keep her distracted. If she asks questions, delay. Let her feel seen, just not heard." I stared at the screen. My jaw didn't clench. My hands didn't shake. I was past that. Audra stood beside me, silent for a moment. Then she said, almost to herself, "I don't believe in revenge, but I do believe in survival and truth." I copied everything. I backed it up to 3 drives, 2 cloud folders. I set a dead man switch. I wasn't careless anymore. As I closed the laptop, the room full of silent files behind me, I whispered, "Now they don't get to choose who I become next." I didn't know it yet, but the first of those 17 missed calls would come by sunrise. They spent years building an image. I spent one night preparing the truth. By the time the sun threatened the ridge above Woody Creek, I was already seated at Audra's kitchen table, laptop open, thermos of lukewarm coffee beside me. She moved quietly around the house, giving me space, but watching with the kind of care that's quiet, not absent. I'd emailed Isaac Merrill at 4:37 a.m. He was a civil rights and financial fraud attorney in Denver, the kind of man who didn't advertise, but whose name floated in courtrooms like the scent of something freshly scorched. A mutual friend from college had connected us 2 years earlier after I'd helped file a grant report she couldn't untangle. We hadn't spoken since. I attached 6 files, labeled, dated, clean. The subject line was direct. Private, urgent matter involving family foundation. At 5:14, my phone buzzed. Isaac, call me now. I stepped outside onto the back porch, pulled the coat tighter, and dialed. He answered on the first ring. I read what you sent, he said, skipping pleasantries. If this is real, you don't just have a case. You have a reckoning. I didn't say anything. They kept you out intentionally, he continued. This wasn't negligence. This was orchestration. And if even half those audio files are authentic, the IRS won't be your biggest ally. The Department of Justice will. They'll come after me, I said. Of course they will. You're not family anymore. You're exposure. I nodded, even though he couldn't see. I wasn't scared of the lawsuit, I said. I was scared of how easy it was to become the threat they always accused me of being. When I returned inside, Audra had cleared space on her office desk. A notepad, USB hub, and 2 encrypted drives waited. I sat down, cracked my knuckles, and began. I wrote the email to Beth Loring at 6:08 a.m. She wasn't just any journalist. She was the woman who made a senator resign mid-term after revealing he'd siphoned disaster relief funds into private construction deals. She didn't deal in gossip, she dealt in documents. The subject line, you've been trying to nail the Artisan Foundation for 5 years. You missed something. The body was 2 sentences. You were looking in the right house, just the wrong wing. I can't go on record, yet, but the attached files will get you to the door. I attached 5 PDFs. A wire transfer signed by Cortland, mislabeled as donor disbursement. A file redirecting employee pensions into a shadow account. The audio clip where Vespera said, as long as Sorrel's out of the way, we won't have to compromise image for equity. A redacted family tree showing my omission. My grandfather's original will. I uploaded the same package to a private cloud. I printed a hard copy and hid it beneath the floorboards under Audra's couch. I set up a dead man switch through an online service. If I didn't log in every 72 hours, it would email the archive to 3 newsrooms and 1 federal office. Truth can't protect you, Audra had said softly from the hallway, unless you prepare for the blast it creates. I hit send at 6:23. At 6:40, Beth replied, I'm listening. The moment after felt quiet in the most unnatural way, like something sacred had just been broken, but no one had realized it yet. I didn't wait for the fallout. I didn't check Twitter. I didn't open the news feeds. I just closed the laptop, leaned back, and stared out at the snowy woods behind Audra's house. At 7:12 a.m., my old phone, silent for days, buzzed for the first time. 1 missed call, then 2, then 15 more, all from unknown numbers. I smiled, leaned over, and whispered to myself, let the avalanche begin. By the time the sun hit Aspen, my silence was headline material. It didn't start with sirens, it started with silence, then headlines. At exactly 6:58 a.m., Beth Loring's voice cut through the sleepy hum of national morning television. No warning, no teaser, just a sharp lead-in. When charity becomes camouflage, today we reveal what the Artisan Foundation didn't want you to see. I was already awake, sitting on Audra's couch with my knees drawn up, blanket tucked under my chin. She sat across from me, still in her robe, steaming mug in hand. Neither of us spoke. On screen, Beth's face was calm, but her words carved through the air like knives. Leaked files obtained this week show evidence of tax evasion, misappropriation of donor funds, and a deliberate internal effort to erase one family member from all public and financial records. Then came the documents, blurred for privacy but unmistakably real. The will. The board meeting notes. Vespera's voice on a recorded clip. She's not good for optics. We need people who can represent what this family stands for. My name, left off the board, struck through in meeting notes. Footage of the family's charity gala followed. Varel in gold. Cortland shaking hands with mayors, Vespara nodding serenely while accepting a leadership award. The screen split, footage on one side, documents on the other. And then the hashtags began to crawl across Twitter feeds and morning news tickers. Had to erase no more. Our truth. Daughter, legacy fraud donors began releasing statements by 7:20. One former board member tweeted, "I had no idea about this. Shame on all of us." By 7:34, a recording of Vespera's call with a PR rep surfaced. "We'll say she's mentally unstable, disgruntled, keep it vague, but emotional." The host of the morning show cut to live footage of Vespera being interviewed outside the estate gates. Reporters surrounded her, microphones pushing into the frame. "This is slander," she said sharply. "It's fake." "None of this," the anchor interrupted. "We have your own recording here, Ms. Draymore. Would you like to comment on your voice saying, and I quote, 'She was never meant to represent us. Her face doesn't fit the story'?" Vespera froze. The screen split again, her silent, stunned face on one side, the audio waveform pulsing on the other. I leaned back on the couch and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "They built an empire on silence and choreography," I murmured. "I just turned on the lights." But the avalanche wasn't over. A clip resurfaced from a gala 6 months earlier. Virel, standing in front of Aspen's elite, giving a heartfelt speech about legacy and womanhood. The clip had gone viral at the time, but someone found the original Google Doc, time-stamped, public, under my name, word for word. The entire speech had been mine, written for a foundation proposal that never got submitted, until she dressed it in heels and applause and called it hers. The internet erupted. Influencers shared side-by-side screenshots. A professor of rhetoric retweeted it with the caption, "Plagiarism is still theft, even if your last name is shiny." An anonymous number texted me. "They used your voice to sound noble. You're the story now." Beth Loring followed up with another post. "If they steal your story, steal it back louder." By 9 a.m., the Artisan Foundation had closed public comments on all platforms. Their website went dark for maintenance. But the damage was already done. The world was finally listening to the part of the story that had always been edited out. Then came the footage from Cortland's live interview. He stood stiffly outside the family's secondary property, wearing a cashmere coat and a forced half-smile. A journalist asked him, point blank, "Did you ever acknowledge your daughter's contributions to your foundation's success?" Cortland blinked, adjusted his tie, looked at the camera, but he didn't speak. Not a word. I stared at the screen, watched him freeze under the weight of silence, and exhaled. "That's the sound of the stage going quiet," I said softly. And it wasn't me who left the room this time. It was them. They didn't say sorry. They tried to reshape the story, salvage what the truth had already burned to the ground. 2 days after the world saw the Artisans for who they really were, I watched the cleanup effort unfold like bad theater. My name didn't trend anymore. Now it was foundation fraud, misappropriation, deceptive donations. But the world hadn't forgotten. They were watching, waiting for the next shoe to drop. And it did. Loudly. An investigative report hit every major outlet that morning. A financial journalist, known for dissecting corporate scandals like surgery, published a deep dive piece titled, "She Branded Herself on Her Sister's Silence." The article featured leaked internal budgets. Virel had used the foundation's general fund, money raised, in part, from the grant I authored, to bankroll her personal PR firm, brand shoots, paid media placements, image campaigns crafted around modern female leadership. I read it over breakfast in my new Denver workspace, a co-op office I shared with nonprofit startups and burnt-out reformists. No one knew who I was. And for once, I liked it that way. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't issue a statement. I let the article speak. "I just wanted the record set straight," I whispered to myself, stirring coffee that had gone cold. Funny who ends up on camera first. By noon, 3 corporate sponsors had dropped their affiliation with the Artisan Foundation. Another posted an apology to their social channels, promising a full audit of their philanthropic partnerships. I didn't gloat. That would have made me small like them. But I did smile when the headline scroll on CNN read, "Exposed, Virel Artisan faces ethics review over misused grant funds." Then came the second hit. Vespara booked a private interview, aired on a late-night segment titled Mothers Under Fire. It was meant to paint her in a softer light, maternal, misunderstood. She wore soft gray. Her voice trembled strategically. "I raised 2 daughters the best way I knew how," she said, eyes glistening. "Sometimes strong mothers are misinterpreted. It hurts to be labeled this way." It was going well for her, until the screen cut to a second clip, leaked anonymously, no source cited. A grainy video, clearly from a cell phone, a dinner party. Vespara, wine glass in hand, slurring slightly. "I never wanted a second daughter, not one that outshined her sister. That was never in the plan." The silence that followed on air was almost musical. The host, visibly blindsided, cleared his throat and cut to commercial. By sunrise, Vespara had resigned from every board she sat on. That night, I sat on my apartment floor, cross-legged with a glass of water, watching the video again. Just once. Public vindication has a strange aftertaste. It isn't sweet. It's quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumph. Just space. The kind of emotional square footage I hadn't had since I was 13. Then, my inbox pinged. Virel. Subject: "We need to talk." I hovered my finger over the message, paused, then clicked delete. No opening, no reading, no reply. Instead, I opened a blank window on my browser and typed, "Register Nonprofit Organization, Colorado." They had their chance. This time, I write the mission. Forgiveness isn't always spoken. Sometimes, it's simply walking away without needing an answer. It had been a week since Vespara's words hit the airwaves like a grenade wrapped in pearls. Since Virel's face disappeared from every billboard in Colorado. Since the artisan name slid from reverence to ridicule. I'd stopped counting the articles. Every headline was another brick off my chest. My apartment in Denver was small, quiet, sun-drenched. The windows let in more truth than that entire estate ever did. I sat by the window that morning, coffee in hand, staring at a small op-ed in the local paper. It was titled, "The Heiress Who Walked Away." Beth Loring had written it. "She didn't burn the bridge," the last line read. "She just stopped needing to cross it." I folded the paper neatly and tucked it inside a folder labeled simply, "Done." Later that afternoon, I met Isaac at a cafe near City Hall. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. He handed me a sealed envelope and his usual no-nonsense look. "You could take this to court," he said. "They'll settle quietly. Or you could walk away and they'll always know what they lost." "What would you do?" I asked. "I'd walk," he replied, sipping his espresso. "But I don't have your name on half a dozen trust agreements." "I don't want their money," I said. "I want to never need it again." He slid the envelope back into his briefcase. "Then you've already won." After he left, I walked to the registrar's office. No press, no announcement, just me and a form titled Nonprofit Entity Registration, Colorado. I signed my name next to the organization's name, the Signal Archive. Mission: to protect whistleblowers from powerful families, foundations, and networks that operate behind glass and gold. I listed Audra as Director Emeritus. When I called to tell her, she didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Well, it's about time you started naming things on your own terms." That night, I poured a glass of wine, not to celebrate, but to acknowledge. Not a toast, just a quiet clink against the side of the sink. I hadn't won in the way they defined it, but I'd reclaimed what they buried. Power, choice, name. Then, a knock at the door. No voice, no buzz from the front. Just a sound, deliberate and quiet. A delivery. I opened the door to find a certified envelope. No return address. Inside, a letter. Vespara's handwriting. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. Some things don't need to be heard to be finished. I placed it in the sink, lit a match, and watched it curl into ash. I didn't need her words anymore. I had my own. Some people inherit houses. I inherited a lie and chose to burn it down. The morning we opened the doors of Echo Ledger, I stood in front of a room full of people who had no idea just how deep the silence used to run. The conference room wasn't grand. White walls, mismatched chairs, and a podium someone had donated from a shuttered school, but it felt like the most honest place I'd stood in years. Outside, news vans idled discreetly, trying to pretend they weren't waiting for a comment. Inside, the plaque we'd mounted near the door read, "Founded by someone who wasn't meant to speak." Beth Loring took the stage before I did. She was crisp, clear, and unapologetically blunt, exactly the way truth should sound. She didn't just expose corruption, she said, scanning the room slowly. She reclaimed her narrative. She reminded us that family should never be a shield for silence. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. When it was my turn, I stepped up, no notes in hand. Just years of truths finally sitting where my silence used to live. I looked at every face in that room. Donors, survivors, reporters. Audra in the back row, arms crossed, watching with a quiet sort of pride. "I'm not here to relive what was done to me," I began. "I'm here to make sure no one else is erased because someone thought their story was inconvenient." Applause came late. The good kind, the kind people give when they realize they're clapping for something bigger than a speech. Later that afternoon, after the crowd thinned, a courier arrived. Another envelope. 3 letters. One from Vespera, one from Cortland, one from Varel. I didn't open any of them. I walked them into the records room of our new foundation, slipped them into a folder labeled "Documented, Irrelevant." Closure is what you do when the door was always locked on the other side. They could have apologized. They could have made space. But their silence told the truth faster than their letters ever could. That night, I drove out to Boulder. No destination in mind, just distance. I pulled into the gravel driveway of a small house tucked between evergreens, the porch light flickering like it hadn't quite adjusted to being trusted again. Inside, the walls were bare except for photos I'd chosen. None were retouched. No one had been cropped out. No one had been invited in who hadn't earned it. I brewed a pot of coffee, poured it into a chipped mug, and sat near the window. The snow outside was beginning to fall again, slow and quiet. I watched it drift, unfazed. I pulled out a journal and wrote in the first blank page. My parents once kicked me out during a snowstorm. My sister smirked. That night, I made 3 calls and built something colder than silence: justice. I closed the journal, leaned back, and let the warmth settle around me. They lost their legacy. I built one of my own.